So this talk will focus on scientific data coming from different sources like simulation, like from big HPC system, and also from instruments like telescopes or the type of instruments. So the main starting point of this presentation is that this type of scientific experiment or simulation really needs data reduction, and we are seeing that from many use cases in the Exascale project, but also for projects that are using smaller systems. So data reduction is really needed for this scientific simulation or experiment. And there are essentially two ways of doing that. You can either use application-specific data reduction techniques, or you can use generic compression techniques. And so this talk would be about scientific data and generic compression technique. So why not application-specific technique? It's because this is very complex to implement inside an application, a lot of effort, a lot of time. And so one good research direction today is to look at how to reduce this data set from the generic perspective, so developing generic compressor. So what I will show is how we can apply generic compression techniques in many aspects of computation. So this is true for scientific computing, but this is probably true also for other disciplines. And you will see that there are some surprising results. So I will show you with several examples coming from the ECP project, the US Exascale project, how we can use compression in different ways to accelerate different forms of computations. And there is certainly a lot of research opportunities behind that. We can think that there will be need in change needed in the system design, but we are not yet there. And so what I will show today is where we are in terms of the design of this compression technique and what is the impact of this technique on the scientific simulation and scientific experiments. So everything you will see and all illustration will come from Argonne, essentially, and our engagement in the ECP project. And so, what I will say, you can imagine will be biased a little bit. This is my vision or our vision of the data reduction, and there is other visions in the other labs that are working on this domain. So this is essentially my view of the thing. Okay, so, oops. So why are we doing that? So if we look at the situation today, in fact, we can already say that in many cases, in fact, scientific simulation or scientific instruments are producing too many data, and this data is too large to be saved, processed, or analyzed. And this is the real problem. You have an example here. This is one of many examples. This is cosmology simulation, and what these people are trying to do is simulate trillions of particles that move to form the universe. So this is the formation of the universe, which is simulated. And this needs to be run for 500 or 1,000 time steps. And so if you want to save all the information produced by this simulation, you will need 20 petabytes. And so the problem is that if you look at the leadership system and the size of the file system that you can use on these systems, well, this is about 20 petabytes. And you will never get all the storage available just for you for one simulation. So you need to reduce the data. The way they do the reduction today is by what's called temporal decimation, which means that they keep only one snapshot over 5, one time step over 5, or one time step over 10. So if you think about it, this means that they remove 80% or 90% of the information that has been produced during the simulation. So this could be acceptable. The problem is that they need this information in some way when they do the analytics of the result of the simulation, and to reproduce or reconstruct this information, in fact, they use some form of interpolation. And that's where the problem is. If you use linear interpolation or whatever order interpolation you want, it's very difficult to reproduce the data which is missing. So lossy compression or compression will help to address this problem and produce better quality of information, and to keep a better quality of information while reducing the data with the same order of magnitude. So the fact that we have data which is too large has many impacts in scientific application. So I just mentioned that the data could be too large to be stored, so there is a problem with the storage footprint. But also when people are doing their simulation, you have the computation time and you have the I/O time. And now what we are seeing is that the I/O time is taking more and more of the total computation time, and so, or the time to solution. And so, of course, we need to reduce this time. And again, this is linked to this notion of data reduction. So this size of data, which is too big, impact also the performance of the application. And one thing that we are starting seeing also now is in fact that the data doesn't even fit in memory. So if you want to simulate a very large system, you will be bounded by the memory size, and people want to get rid of that. And one way to get rid of that is to see how we can compress the data and have the data compressed in memory, right? And so that's different directions that are possible. So why this is important or interesting for system designers? So the first thing is that even if it's used today, data reduction is maybe not mainstream, but for the exascale, it will really become mainstream. Many applications in the ECP project really want to have data reduction techniques. That's not just an option, they really need that, and you will see examples. So if you start thinking about it, and if you use data reduction in different aspects, one of the most important impacts on system designer is that the data format is changed. So it's not fixed anymore. It's not homogeneous anymore. So everything we thought about, like a cache line or a page table or page size, all of that will have to be redesigned or think differently because you don't have data which is fixed enough or which is predictable. So I think there is a lot of opportunities there for system designer, but again, we are not yet there. First, we need to understand how to do compression and what is the impact on the application. So what are we trying to do? So the idea is to compress floating point numbers, and what you have here is an image that was produced by Leonardo Bautista Gomez from BSc. And what you see is a stack of 128 numbers, floating point numbers, and you see the bit representation of that. So this is just a stack of them for one type of simulation. So you see the sign is pretty stable, the exponent is pretty stable, and then you have the mantissa. And that's where the problem is. In fact, if you look at this mantissa and you compare that to just random noise, well, it's pretty similar. Okay, so the problem that we have is that we have to compress something which is which looks like, it's not, but it looks like very random. So if we look at data compression, it's not a young discipline, it's quite old, in fact. So the very first theory of that is Shannon, and it's already 70 years old. And one of the compression techniques that you use almost every day with gzip is about 40 years old. So it's a very well-known domain. What's interesting is that it has been used a lot for integer or characters, but in fact, the research on trying to compress floating point numbers is very young, and we have very little results or very little literature about that. So there is a lot of opportunities in that direction. And of course, if we look at the other domains, the other IT domains, compression, and in particular lossy compression, is almost everywhere. On your cell phone, most of the data is lossy compressed with a very high compression ratio. Your image, your movie, your audio, all of that is compressed. And so one question that we could have, or we could ask ourselves, is why this is not applied to scientific computing or to scientific instruments. And I will try to show you examples where, in fact, we can apply compression. So the first thing we could do is to say, well, okay, let's do compression. And one very first step is maybe just to try to encode the data which is produced. So you just try to put that into an encoder. And essentially, what you will be bound with is with the Shannon theory that will give you, in fact, the entropy of your data set. And so you see here a set of floating point data sets for different simulations. And you see the entropy computed by the Shannon equation. And you see the average number of bits that you need to represent each of the floating point data that is in this data set. So you can see that the number of bits, so we're talking about a 64-bit data in these data sets, And you can see that the entropy for many of them is about 25, which means that the maximum reduction that you can get would be about a factor of 2, right? You go from 64 bits to 24 bits or 25 bits, right? So maximum of a factor of 2 or a little bit more, right? So that's not the way to go. We need compression ratio at about 10 hundredths, okay? So 2 is not enough. So how do we compress? Well, the way to compress is to use in the dataset some redundancy or extract from redundancies from the dataset. So you will try to exploit similarities in the dataset, autocorrelation of the data, or smoothness of the data. There are different ways of doing that, but essentially you will need to add another stage in your compressor, and that's what you see here is the decorrelation stage. Right? That's what the decorrelation stage, and then you go to coding. Decorrelation can be done in different ways. You can use orthogonal transform, prediction techniques, or decomposition like singular value decomposition or high order singular value decomposition if you want. But what an important aspect of that is, in fact, if you look at the data set themselves, you can see that there is opportunities for smoothness exploitation, and so this technique of decorrelation are really useful. So if you try to do that now, so again, you use a decorrelation technique and then coding technique, and you try to apply that to some data set. This has been done 4 years ago for several data sets, several compression techniques. Well, the most you can get is still a factor of 2. Okay, so I'm still lossless in this design. Until now, I'm still lossless, and the message here is that if you just use lossless compression, whatever technique you have, on scientific data set, the most compression factor you can get is about a factor of 2. So that's not what we need. We need 10 or hundreds. The only way to go is to add this stage here, which is a stage called the approximation stage, where we do quantization. And in fact, that's where we add lossiness in this scheme of compression. So you have the decorrelation, the lossy part, which is doing quantization, and then you have the coding, which is the last stage. So all the compressors or scientific compressors are built that way. Right? All the compressors that we are using for scientific computing are built that way. So now that we know how to build our compressor, one of the problems is how can we be accepted by the user, how a user can accept to use a lossy compressor. Essentially, the lossy compressor will add a noise, will add error in the data set, how the user will accept that. The only way that you can make that acceptable for the user is to integrate a notion of control and notion of the control of the error that the compressor will add in your data set. Okay? And so we have here, for almost all the compressors that I know, lossy compressor, 2 controls that are very fundamental. One is the absolute error bound, and the other one is the relative error bound. So what it means is that on each data point, you will guarantee a maximum error. So if I use my data set, my scientific data set, I will use my compressor. The user will be able to fix a maximum error on each data point, right? So you have this guarantee, and the compressor needs to provide this guarantee. If you have that, then this is easier for the user to accept to use lossy compression. Now, there are 3 frontiers in this domain that I will present. One is performance. So how do we improve the performance of these compressors to make them better, to compress with higher compression ratio and to compress faster? I will show you what we do at Argonne. Then there is the use cases, the different usage that we can do with a lossy compressor when we use that for scientific simulation. And then an aspect which is very important is the methodology. Again, is related to the error and how do you assess the error that the compressor has produced. Okay, so let's look at the compressor and how did they improve. So that's the key progress in the past 2 or 3 years. I should say that this discipline has kind of expanded a lot in the past 2 or 3 years. Many teams now are trying to develop new compressors because there is really this needs of developing compression techniques. And so there have been many attempts and many improvements in the transform-based compression technique, and ZFP is the best compressor known for that. In prediction techniques, so again, it's the decorrelation stage. So SZ, which is the one that we develop at Argonne, is one of the best compressor for that. There are people doing decomposition, like Tucker decomposition, tensor decomposition, which is a very nice technique if you have a very high dimensionality problem, and there is a software if you want to follow this direction. So there are different techniques that could be used. One of the most recent one is MGuard, which is using a multi-grid techniques to do this data reduction. So that's just showing that, in fact, there is a diversity of techniques that are explored now, and people are trying to compare that to understand the difference between these techniques and how to apply it when and for what type of problems. And we have also started doing a lot of comparison between these compressors. And so in particular, we did the comparison between SZ and ZFP. And one lesson, which is a very important lesson for now, is that none of these compressors is always the best on all data sets. Okay? Which means that you really need, if you are a user, to compare these different compressors and decide which one is the good for you, which can be kind of painful. And so there are some research now to do this automatic selection for you, right? How you can analyze the data set and decide which compression technique will be the best. So the compressor that we do at Argonne, which is SZ, is done in the context of the ECP project, the Exascale Computing Project. And again, this is to serve many ECP applications. It works for floating point and integer data, essentially for 1D, 2D, and 3D structured and unstructured data set. And it's integrated into the main I/O libraries. So the important aspect is that we have a very strict error control. And as I said, it's important for your user acceptance of this compressor. So how it works? So we have a prediction stage for the decorrelation stage. It's doing a prediction. And then we have an approximation stage, which is performing a quantization of the prediction error. And then we have the coding of these bins that we got from the quantization stage. So it's a very easy, very simple compressor. I will not go into much detail, but one thing is that this compressor needs to be super fast. It needs to have linear complexity. It cannot be more than that, because otherwise it will take too much time and people will not use that. So that's why, in fact, these compressors generally are very simple. Now, one thing that we do, which is new in the compression area, I think, and at least for scientific compression, is that we have a multi-algorithm compression technique. So instead of using only one algorithm for the decorrelation, we use two algorithms, and soon we will use three algorithms that we choose to perform the decorrelation. So what's interesting here is that we take the data set, we decompose the data set into blocks, and for each block, we analyze the data, and from this analysis, we choose the decorrelation technique, which is the best for this data block. And that's the pipeline that you see. So the message here is that even if they look very simple on paper, in fact, lossy compressor could be very technical inside, very, very complex inside, but they are optimized for performance. So that was the decorrelation stage. Here is the quantization stage, very simple. So we do a prediction, as I said, and we build a scale here, which is built from bins, and these bins have the size of twice the error bound that the user has fixed. So we do a prediction, then there is the real value. So this prediction is made in floating point numbers, and we compare with the real value, which is the floating point number also. And what we get is a distance between the two in that scale. And we can get a bin number, right, which corresponds to this distance. And this bin number is now an integer. So I just move from floating point to integer, and that's what I will work on from now. So, of course, what I will try to do with this prediction technique is to try to always shoot on this center bin. So you have a lot of bins here. You want to try to be as precise as possible for the prediction. So this means shooting in the bin where the real value is, right? So try to always be very close to the real value. But in reality, in fact, this type of prediction technique is not perfect. And so you will use different bins. And what you try to get is a distribution of the heat in these bins, which has this type of very spiky form. So here, for example, you see the central bin and how much of the prediction hit this central bin. So we do a very good prediction for these numbers, and then you have less and less precise prediction that is done for other numbers. So that's very important for the coding stage, because this type of distribution will help for the variable length encoding. Okay, and that's what we do here. We use the Huffman encoding as the coding scheme. So we build a tree, a Huffman tree, dynamically to be able to handle this coding technique. And the goal here is to use a minimum number of bits to represent all the integers that are coming from this quantization scheme, right? So that's very simple. That's how it works. So at the beginning, I said that some of the applications are using decimation. So what you may wonder now is how this compressor compares to decimation. So that's an experiment that we did. So here is the hack simulation, so the same data set that I mentioned before. And I'm comparing now decimation, which is, again, removing many of the snapshot, of the information on the snapshot, and try to reconstruct with linear interpolation. I'm trying to compare that with the compressor that I just mentioned. So you have here the graph. This is the peak signal to noise ratio. The highest is the best. And this is the bit rate, which is the average number of bits to represent each data from the initial data set. So here, for example, you only use 2 bits to represent each 64-bit floating point numbers. Okay? So in that situation, you can see what is the signal to noise ratio for decimation, and you can see the difference with the compressor. Okay, so you have, I don't know, something like maybe 60 or 70 dB difference, which is a very large difference in terms of peak signal to noise ratio. And in fact, it goes all the way. So which means that for this application, in that particular case, in fact, lossy compression is much better in terms of reconstruction of the data and the quality of the data that you get compared to the technique which is used today, which is decimation, right? So that's an important result. It shows that, in fact, we can get very high precision, or much higher precision with lossy compression than with decimation. So now if you look at this frontier of compressor and where we are today, the message is that, in fact, after all the experiments that we have done, and this is true for many teams, we can say that none of this decorrelation technique or compression technique is always the best. And so if you use prediction, orthogonal transform, wavelet transform, Tucker decomposition, or whatever, all of these techniques, in fact, cannot beat, or any of these techniques cannot beat all the other one. And so, which means that, in fact, this discipline of data reduction for scientific computation needs to go into a direction where, in fact, we build the compressor pipeline based on the data set, right? So for now, this is fixed. You use a fixed pipeline. In our case, you can adapt a little bit, right? You have multi-algorithm, but the future is really to adapt dynamically the compressor to the dataset as you compress the dataset. That's how things will evolve probably in the future. Second frontier is the use cases or the applicability of this lossy compression technique. And first, of course, and the most classic one is visualization. So that's the first use case for lossy compression. And you see here 2 cases from, this one is from ECP. So that's the velocity field from the NICS, which is another cosmology simulation. And you can see the improvement that we did in the past 2 or 3 years for our compressor. So that was 2 years ago. That's a competitor. And that's how it looks now for the compressor that we have today. And the compression ratio is 156. So you can really reduce drastically the data set and keep in visualization something which is pretty similar to the initial data. In fact, the PSNR is here 56 dB, which is pretty high. Right, so that's a good situation. You can see that also for a climate simulation here. You have also very good accuracy for the visualization, while in fact 2 years ago it was kind of not exploitable. So that's the first use case, visualization. Everyone knows that this is where lossy compression can be used. Second use case, reducing the streaming intensity. So here we are talking about another exascale project, which is in fact linked to the LINAC accelerator at Stanford. And so this accelerator, or it's not an accelerator, it's a light source. And so this light source, in fact, is producing 2D images at a very high rate. So it's not yet doing that. It will do that in the upgrade, which will start in 2019. So it will generate 250 gigabytes per second of information. So we need to reduce this information. And the idea is that they are looking at a reduction factor of 10. So they just want to use a lossy compression technique that will provide this factor 10 compression. And so one thing is that, well, you can say this is image, just use a JPEG. Why not use all the lossy compressor already available for image? Problem is that they want an absolute error bound for each data point. So it's not just they want to compress, they want to make sure that on each data point they preserve an accuracy that they can control, right? It's very important. So they want to do that. Okay, so then the only way they can do that is to use our compressor. And so we tried several tests on their data set, and we could achieve a factor of compression of 9, so we are very close to the target. The problem here is that we need to accelerate the compression by a factor of 5, so the speed needs to be accelerated. And that's where the co-design enters into play. It's now the design of the system with the cluster and maybe FPGA to be able to bring this performance and to provide them with the data reduction needed. And of course, there is a quality assessment here, and in that case, it's the fact that you can retrieve, in fact, the Celerium atom, and so they compared with no compression and compression and tried to see if they could find this atom again, and in fact, they managed to do that. And they are using this SD result in several of their presentation on their own physics conference. So that was the second thing. So the third usage is reducing the storage footprint. So it's a little bit linked to visualization in some ways. So the idea is to respond to the very first case. It's really the hack case. We're trying to reduce as much as possible the data to make it fit on the file system. And so here is the hurricane simulation. And we got a compression ratio of 62. And you can see that, in fact, again, if you try to visualize the result, you will see very little difference. But you can also assess that with some metrics, and that's important. It's not only visualization. You need to have metrics to be able to assess the quality. And so here you have the SSIM and you have the PSNR. So again, the PSNR is the peak signal-to-noise ratio. And here, 50 dB means that you have a ratio of 1,000 between the signal and the noise, which is good enough for this application. SSIM is the structural similarity index, and it looks at the preservation of structures in this data set, the structures that you see, okay? And it needs to be very close to 1. And so in that situation, it's very close to 1. And you have also the compression and decompression time. It's 1 second, about 1 second for this case with our compressor. Now you can try to compare that with old technique, or older technique, like decimation again, but not in time. In that case, it's decimation in space. So what you do is you do a sampling, a spatial sampling, and then you try to reconstruct the information that is missing using a 3-cubic interpolation. So that's a technique which is used in visualization. So if you try to do that, you get much lower PSNR, you get a much lower SSIM, and the time for compression and decompression is much higher because the 3-cubic interpolation, in fact, is not linear, as you know. Okay, so the message here is that for this type of application, you can use also your lossy compressor to reduce your data set and keep a very high accuracy. Now, since you have reduced the data set for the storage, it will automatically, in some way, accelerate the I/O, and that's the fourth use cases. We have another ECP application here. We did an experiment. The idea is that if you run this application on this cluster, you need to save 24 terabytes of data. And on that particular file system, if you do that, it will take 6 hours. Okay, so it takes too much time to do this transfer of the I/O. And so the idea here was to try to compress, again, get a significant compression factor in order to accelerate the I/O. So the interesting point here is that the compression ratio is 65 according to some error control, which is good for the user. And the I/O acceleration is 86. So you can say, how come the acceleration is higher than the compression? It should be the same. In fact, what happens is that when you are not compressing, you are hitting a congestion situation in the storage system, and so it's behaving non-linearly now. So you have time which is increasing and which is not linearly increasing with what you want to save. And so if you compress, you go below that congestion threshold, and then you can exploit better the bandwidth. And so that's another aspect of it. You save time, but you can also save time which is more than linear if you are in a congestion situation. There are some other scenarios here to accelerate the I/O, but and some other results for some other application with also some good results. So until now, everything I said it was not really controversial. Okay, now I will start talking about things that are less consensual, let's say. So one thing is doing checkpoint restart, but doing checkpoint restart from lossy state. Okay, so now what I will do is that when I will do my execution, from time to time I will save the state in order to be able to do a restart if there is a problem. But when I will save this state, I will compress it first, and I will use lossy compression for that. Okay, so I will remove information. So the big question here is, can I restart from a lossy state and get a result which is acceptable, right? And that's a very important factor. So we tried different things, and one thing which was pretty successful was just to try a simple solver. And so the idea here is to solve a sparse matrix problem. And so we try to use that with GEMRES, which is an algorithm which is known to tolerate error. And so we try to do that and see how well, in fact, GEMRES could compensate for restart from lossy state. And so we did that in the context of PETSI. So we use PETSI. We use the restarted version of GEMRES. We use a preconditioner which was proposed by PETSI. And again, we compress with our compressor. And we did that on one of the clusters at Argonne. And so what you see here is the convergence of GEMRES from the problem. And we do several checkpoint and restart. And what you observe here, if you zoom, in fact, is that you are just adding few more iterations. Okay, so you compress, you restart, and when you restart, if there is an error, in fact, you just need few more iterations to keep the convergence going. And so this is very interesting because, in fact, it doesn't increase too much the execution time, but it saves a lot on the I/O time, on the checkpoint time, right? And so you can see here that in this configuration, we saved up to 70% of the overhead, the checkpoint overhead, just by doing that, right? So that's an interesting result. And in fact, it's not just this experiment that we did. There is an application in ECP who is looking at doing a restart from lossy state. So if you had asked me that 1 year ago, I would say no way that an application would try to do that in the next 2 or 3 years, right? Because this is kind of controversial. But then, in ECP, this application, NWChem, people came to us and said, we would like to do that, to do restart from lossy state. And so they have to solve a particular problem. So it's an n-body problem that they solve with the coupled cluster approach. And essentially, you have an iterative process. And what they want to do is, again, to be able to save some of the snapshots in order to be able to restart if there is a failure, and this snapshot will be saved in the compressed way. And so for now, what we have is the gain of the I/O time, which is mentioned here. So we were able to get a factor of 5 to 10 acceleration in the checkpoint time, which is very good. Your checkpoint is much lower, much faster than what it was. And they have done some experiments to show that, in fact, the problem is still going to the correct solution after restarting from this lossy state. So that was one of the use case which was controversial. Another one, which I think is very interesting, is not done by us, but I wanted to mention it. This is the Gordon Bell Award in 2017. And this was a team in China who tried to use lossy compressor in order to reduce the pressure on the memory bandwidth. So the idea here now, which is very interesting, is that you will have the data set compressed in memory, right? It's lossy compressed in memory. You get some block from the memory, you decompress the block, you work on this block, you compress this block, and you store the compressed block in memory again. So what's lived in memory is not your data, it's the compressed version of your data, right? And so that's what they did, and they did with a very simple algorithm. In fact, they used 3 different types of algorithms, but they want to be very, very fast. And their goal was to just gain a factor of 2 to accommodate the bandwidth between the processor and the memory. Just a factor of 2, and they use very simple recasting of the data to be able to do that. Okay, they got their factor of 2, and they compared with the execution or the simulation without compression and with compression, and they are satisfied with the results. So this is their quality criteria. The important aspect here is that you need some architecture mechanism to be able to do that. And they were lucky to have a scratchpad in their processor to be able to get the block, work on the block on the scratchpad to decompress it, and then compute and then store the block in the scratchpad uncompress and then compress it to be able to store it in memory. If you have a cache, it will be much more difficult to do than if you have a scratchpad. So that's an interesting point, is that if you want to use this type of compression between the processor and the memory, maybe you need some specific device inside the processor, like a scratchpad, to be able to handle this. And now I will show you another one, which is, I think, the most striking one that we have seen so far. And that's how you can avoid recomputation. And that's an ACP application again. It's doing quantum chemistry. And so essentially solving the Schrödinger equation. And here they use a method that computes electron repulsion integral. So it's called the ERIS. And so you have a lot of these integrals that you need for your computation, and it's iterative. At each iteration, you need all of these integrals. Well, what's the problem here is that if you want to simulate a very large problem, then these integrals do not fit in memory. So they just do not fit in memory, right? So what they need to do is just to recompute them at each iteration, and this is, for some problem, the majority of the computation time. So you spend your time recomputing what you cannot fit in memory, right? And so the idea here was to say, let's try to compress this and avoid recomputing these integrals. And so when you look at the data set formed by this integral, this is just a linearization of it, like a time series. In fact, it looks like hopeless. It's too spiky, doesn't seem to have any correlation. So we were very doubtful at the beginning that we could compress that. And then a student came for his summer internship and said, well, if I look carefully, I can see that there is a pattern here. And this pattern is just stretched, right? It's just stretched vertically. And I can know what is the size of this pattern from the simulation that I am doing, in fact. And so the student discussed with the physicist, and then they came up with this notion that, in fact, you can extract the patterns that you see on this data set, put that into a catalog, and just replace all the data set by index to this pattern, right? And if you do that, you get a very high compression ratio, which is about 17, good enough to make all the areas fit in memory, right? You can do that very quickly, about 1 gigabyte per second for compression and decompression, and you accelerate the computation of these areas by 25% or 2.5x, depending on the problem that you are solving, right? Since these areas, or recomputing these areas, for some problem represent the majority of the execution time, this means that this is close to something you will actually gain on the overall computation. So that's a way to accelerate your computation, right? So that's I think a very interesting result, and we got a best paper for this result. An important aspect is that the error band needs to be very, very low for this problem. So here we are talking about error band of 10 to minus 10, which are extremely low, the lowest that we have seen so far. But because there were this pattern, we could get a high compression factor. So that's a very successful result. So I will skip the next one, which is reducing the memory footprint. We are doing that in the context of the simulation of quantum circuits. And again, this is a success story, but I have, I think, no time to explain that. If you are interested, I can discuss that later. So what are the frontier in this applicability of the compression? So you have seen different use cases, and in fact the situation is that you probably need different compressors for these different use cases. If you are trying to compress the data in memory, you need a super fast compressor, much faster than the one we have developed, in fact, because the one we have developed is still too slow for trying to compress between the processor and the memory in the Chinese case. Right, so you will need something specific. For reducing the footprint of storage, what is important is the compression ratio. Being slow is okay, right? If you look at checkpoint restart, the very important thing is the error control. You need to be very, very careful on the error control. So what you start thinking now or seeing is that there are different use cases, and these different use cases needs different compressors. So again, what we have seen as fixed compressors or fixed compression scheme until now will probably evolve to more specific compressors for these different techniques, and probably hardware implementation of these compressors. So the third frontier, and I think I will finish on this, is about the methodology. And it's very important, right? So, and that was missing in this discipline before. The idea here is to say that, in fact, okay, now we have multiple lossy compressors, we have different data sets. How can we compare this compression technique fairly, right? And that's an important aspect. You need as a user to be able to decide which one is the best. And there were no tool really available when we started doing that. And what was missing is metrics. How do you compare the quality of these compressors? And benchmarks. What are the data sets that we can use to compare these compressors? Right? So this was missing. And so we decided to, with the community, in fact, to launch two efforts. One is to think about the metrics that are really important for these scientific applications, and design or define a common set of benchmarks that people can use to compare compressors, but also to propose new compressors and to check how good they are. And so one tool that we do at Argonne is called Z-Checker, and I think it's a very interesting tool. What it does, it's a community tool, so it means that, in fact, you can contribute if you are interested by providing an analytics module, an error analytics module. So what it does is that it takes the initial data set, so uncompressed data set, and the decompressed data set as input. So you have two inputs, the initial data set and the decompressed data set. And so the decompressed data set, of course, has a lot of errors coming from the lossy compression in it, right? So this tool is assessing the error, right? It's just trying to characterize the error with multiple metrics so that the user can see and understand the nature of the error that you have in these data sets. And so we have multiple papers on that. The important thing is that when you are running this tool, you can run it offline, and it generates a PDF, which is a report about this error. So it's about 30 pages on error, so it's a bit boring, but you have a full characterization of your error with multiple metrics. And we did that for many of the Exascale applications, so that for them to understand the error and to see if it's acceptable. So that's the first step. The second step is to be able to do that dynamically during the simulation. So the idea here is that you start your simulation that you see here, and then you start your analytics of the error. And you start having, metrics here that you see. It could be PSNR or the mean square error or the compression time or the entropy or whatever. We have, I think, about 30 metrics that there are 15 metrics that you can use offline and 30 metrics that you can use and 15 metrics that you can use online, sorry. So you see here, during the simulation, how the error manifests in terms of this time series, right? So that's where we are today. You see here another graph of this analytics. In terms of this repository with all the data sets that I have mentioned, the benchmark, so this is SDR bench. And this is a community effort, like the previous one, right? So again, if you want to contribute to ZChecker, you have an idea of what would be a very interesting matrix, please come to us, and then we will add your module into ZChecker. In that repository, same, if you have a data set which is important to you and you really want to have a comparison of the compressor and people developing compressor look at your data set, then you can send the data set to us and we will put that in the repo. And so you can go there and you will see in this repository about 13, I think, data sets from this ECP application or other application. So this is the first attempt in the community to have your data set open for access, large data set that you can compress. And in this page, you have also list and link to compressors that you can use and to metrics that matters, right? So that's another aspect of the methodology. So where is the frontier here? So these applications, they have different needs in terms of metrics. Some of them will worry about the pointwise error. Some of them will worry about statistical aspect. And in fact, what we are seeing now is that as they understand and they learn more how to use lossy compression for their application, they come up with new metrics, things that are a refinement of what they had before. And that's a very interesting point. So one of the frontiers, for example, now is to try to understand how derivatives or derived quantities are preserved with a lossy compressor. And so that's a kind of second order or third order thing for the compressor to maintain. It's very hard. For now, you have no compressor where you can fix certain error bound for the preservation of derivatives, right? But that's what matters for the scientists using this simulation. They want to be able to preserve derived quantities. So we learn that now, and so we need to improve the compressor to make that happen. And so the other thing that I think is another part of the frontier is that this visualization where you see time series is very not easy to use for a user. And I think the real direction here is to show why you are doing the simulation and why you are visualizing your data set, the output of your data set, to show directly on this data, in fact, where is the error. So you can say, well, no, I don't want this error at that level there. I want a lower error for this part of the simulation, right? So that's, I think, one part of the frontier for this discipline. So if you want to have more information about SZ, you just Google SZ, GitHub, and then you can have access to the GitHub, and you can download and check. For ZChecker, same thing. You just Google ZChecker GitHub. And for SDR Bench, well, you have the address here. So again, this is open. If you are interested, please try. I put the list of papers here, not to show how many papers we have produced, but to show that, in fact, in just 2 years, we could produce a lot of results because this is a very new domain. This is a very, very new domain. So there is a lot of opportunities, right? You can produce a lot of papers and a lot of interesting results from this discipline. So the conclusion, so I try to show you that we need to reduce scientific data set, and there is a big need for that. Lossy compression as a reduction technique for scientific data set has progressed a lot. We have a much better accuracy now than the previous technique like decimation. We keep information useful for most of the data set. And the error control is really something that is important for this lossy compression technique. And if you develop a lossy compressor that doesn't have a strict respect of user set error bound, it will not be adopted. So you really need to do that. There are many research opportunities, compressor design. So you have seen that we are still progressing. Usage of lossy compression. Again, 1 year ago, I would not have mentioned lossy compression for checkpoint restart, and even not for in-memory compression, right? I would not have done that. So there is a progress in this understanding of where we can apply lossy compression. The metrics are not stabilized. We need to do more in that. Error analysis tools is still developing, and as I mentioned at the beginning, I mean, if this is adopted by the scientific application with these different use cases, this will have an impact on system design. It cannot stay like that if people are using lossy compression. Thank you.